Hello, I'm Reverend Kevin Small, Senior Pastor here at Hope United Methodist Church, and I'm coming through just to thank you for the way you have responded to our Resurge Generosity Initiative. We have been blessed by the outpouring of our members who showed up, who made commitments, and who have stuck by those commitments so that we can see some of the fruits of those labors. Thanks be to God for all that you have done to help us advance our ministry and where we're going. We are looking forward to 2023, where you will see some of the results in a programmatic way of your giving. So sit back, put your seatbelts on, let us look to God, who will provide us a marvelous and wonderful future as we together resurge in Jesus' name.
Hello, I'm Preston Boyd.
And I'm Jean Boyd.
And we just want to extend an invitation to you to come to Hope United Methodist Church and utilize our food pantry. We're here on the first Saturday of each month from the hours of 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. If you are in need of food assistance, we ask that you call and make a reservation. Our number is 248-356-4408. Be blessed and have a great day.
Hello, I'm Reverend Kevin Small, Senior Pastor here at Hope United Methodist Church, and I'm coming through just to thank you for the way you have responded to our Research Generosity Initiative. We have been blessed by the outpouring of our members who showed up, who made commitments, and who have stuck by those commitments so that we can see some of the fruits of those labors. Thanks be to God for all that you have done to help us advance our ministry and where we're going. We are looking forward to 2023, where you will see some of the results in a programmatic way of your giving. So sit back, put your seatbelts on, let us look to God, who will provide us a marvelous and wonderful future as we together resurge in Jesus' name. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to our Christian Bootcamp series. This season, we're going to do it a little differently. We'll be focusing on special topics, especially for February and March. February, of course, is Black History Month, and we will be studying and exploring what it means to have a theology centered around being black. What is it? What is a black theology? And some of us, remember, we talked a lot about theology and theological concepts, and we touched a little bit on black theology, but this time we're going in depth. We're going to really dig deep. So we're going to explore quite a bit. We're going to look at the gospel and how that impacts black people. We're going to explore the notion that you hear that Christianity is a religion for white people. We'll be looking at all of those entities, and we'll be using as our foundational guide the work of James Cone, who kind of was one of the pioneers in studying black theology and even black power. And we'll be looking at all that tonight. If you're new to boot camp, we want to welcome you. We call this boot camp because a couple of things. Number one, we spent a lot of time last year getting to the basics of Christian faith. We explored what salvation means. We explored how to read the text. We explored problems in reading the text. We explored some of the Christian doctrines. We explored some spiritual formation. So this go around, we're going to look at special topics. This year, we're starting off with Black history, as I've mentioned, and next month is Women's History Month. And we're going to take a different twist. We're going to study women and the theological assumption that supports them in their connectedness and in their faith development. So, and men, I need you here too, because it's a lot for all of us to learn. So I want to say welcome and good evening to everybody. Let me just tell you, I've missed you. I was saying to myself, I feel kind of disconnected when I don't have this weekly experience with you. So I'm glad to bring it back. I've been humming and skipping all day because I've just been excited to just get back into boot camp. Now, let me let you know that I don't profess to be an expert in these entities, but I do want to introduce them because I think it's very important that as believers we stretch our belief systems, we test our belief systems, we hear what other people are thinking, that informs us of our own individual ideologies, concepts, and beliefs. So you have to kind of have an open mind to be in boot camp. If you're looking to be indoctrinated, this is not the class, or this is not the experience you want to be a part of. I do not, and we do not condone indoctrinating people in this experience we call Christian boot camp. We want to throw you some things to think about and to consider so you can be well informed in your faith. And this is how we grow in faith. So I appreciate you. I do have you here so I can see who's on. And if you want to ask me some questions, I'll be looking there from time to time to take some of your questions or some of your comments. This is as interactive as we can make it without being in person. And we have friends from all over the place, typically, who join us. And so I want to welcome all of you. I want to welcome the Hope family, and I want to welcome the Friends of Hope who are joining us from various parts of the connection and of the church and of the community, period. So wherever you're from, we want to say welcome to you, and we're glad that you're here. So we are typically, for those of you who are new with us, we typically meet for 1 hour, and we'll try to get you out of here on time, and we'll certainly try to start on time. Our church bells rings at 6:30, and usually when they stop ringing, we're ready to roll. So come on in at 6:30. Let's get comfortable, get relaxed. Next week, you're probably going to need your Bibles and your text. But this week, it's not a bad idea to take a couple of notes, because we're going to do some defining tonight. We're going to do some foundational work that will get us ready for what's ahead in the next 3 weeks together. So let us pause for God's blessing. And again, welcome to everyone. Thank you all for saying hello. I'm so glad to have you in the house. It means a lot. Let us look to God in prayer. God, for this day, we give you thanks. We thank you for the opportunity to gather as your church and to break open theories and concepts as we strive to get closer to you. And so take us into the deep. Help us to consider all these things so that we might be stronger disciples of Jesus Christ in a very divided and violent world. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Again, welcome everybody. Come on in. It's good to see you, Pat, Irma, and Phyllis. And we have the Boyds with us. It's Sister Hardy and another Pat Brown. We're glad she's in here. Beverly, and of course Sheila and Yvonne and the Harrises are here. We thank God for you tuning in. And remember, these are concepts, right? I'm representing these concepts. These are not necessarily my beliefs, and they may be, or they may not be, but I am representing these thoughts. And tonight I'm borrowing heavily from the work of James Cone. Now, Dr. James Cone was a professor of theology at Union Theological Seminary. He, again, wrote Black Theology and Black Power. He wrote God of the Oppressed. He wrote The Lynching Tree. He is a good read, and he is not very difficult to read. Some of his concepts are kind of hard to grasp, but he is a good contributor to our conversation on Black theology. He was also a Methodist minister. He grew up in an AME church, and I believe he spent some time with the United Methodist Church. And it wasn't very long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years, that he actually passed away. But he is a giant in the realm of theological study, and it's very good to spend some time. It's not a bad idea to just go to Amazon and grab a couple of his books and read them at your leisure as you are so led. So why is it important to talk about Black theology this Black History Month? Why is it important to talk about race? And one of the reasons I feel that it's important to talk about race is because we are in a very heated, a very intense, and a very difficult time when it comes to the race relations in the United States. Now, to be clear, my theory and my thoughts with the election of a black president, there seems to be a sociological reaction that Martin Luther King called the white backlash. Here is a two-term president who in some cases absorbed a good chunk of disrespect and in some cases presided over a country that grew more divided the longer he was there. When he gave the State of the Union address, unlike any other president, there were a couple of times he was almost heckled pretty much. They hollered out to him. These were two white men that was so angry with what he was saying, they yelled out to him while he was giving his speech. Even his wife and his children went through insults and shameful kinds of rhetoric. It's a very difficult experience. So what has seemed to happen is the following president ran on the premise, and some of these things have really challenged us, that you don't have to be ashamed of what you think. Stand up for your belief system. Stop letting people tell you that you're a racist. Stop letting people tell you that you're prejudiced. Stop letting people tear down your statues. Stop letting people take you back from religious beliefs. And the hard recognition is that many people, many white people, base racist notions on biblical text. So there are some that think they are right. God has recognized them. God has called them apart to be the people of privilege. And there are some African Americans that support some of those notions. And we'll kind of look at that a little later tonight. So now it has caused a very big problem. And to be honest with you, even this conversation that I've had so far is very difficult, if not impossible, for some pastors to unpack in the context of Bible studies and conversations in the life of their churches, because the subject is too volatile. And the American community is so amped up and hyped, especially as it relates to listening to some of the news networks and being on social media platforms. We are growing more angry, more hateful, and more divided. And it always boils down to race. Whether we like it or not, we have to struggle with the concept of race. W.E.B. Du Bois says, the problem of the 21st century, of the 20th century, is the problem of the color line. And I'm telling you, the problem of the 21st century is still the problem of the color line. And if we're not honest about it, if we're not truthful about it, if we don't look at these trends, and if we don't look at these scenarios, we will be subject to be victimized and claimed by racial horror as it relates to our ability to work and connect with one another. So we are at a very difficult time that's fueled by racism, but in a different way. We've not quite seen it like this, many of us, in our lifetime. So now we have people who are openly fine with calling people by the N-word. There's an openness to tell people to go back to their country or to speak American, as they say. They mean speak English, but we're seeing people fighting in the stores, in neighborhoods, And of course, we're seeing this continued practice of bias and violence as it relates to police work, inner city stuff, etc. And we'll look at arguments as why some of those things are taking place. But what we all have to agree with is it's a painful time. It's a painful thing to witness. It's a painful thing to admit. It's a painful thing to discuss. And one of the reasons I love being a Methodist, because for years, John Wesley was highly against the institution of slavery, and so was the Methodist Church. And there was a Harry Hoosier, who was one of the first black preachers in the American Methodist movement that preached. He wasn't believed that he could read, but he preached heaven down, and white and black folk would come from afar to hear him preach. And soon after that, the Methodist Church began its long years of struggle around race. And because of our struggles with race, we had the first group leave us, known as the AME Church. And when I say us, they left the Methodist Episcopal Church, because that was the first name of our denomination. They left and became the African Methodist Episcopal Church because they believed the gospel that was being preached. But they didn't believe they needed to sit in a balcony, and they didn't believe they needed to be second-class citizens in their own churches and in their own communities of faith. And then it just spread to the AME Zion Church. And in 1844, the Methodist Church split over slavery. 1870, the CME Church was born from the southern branch of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And 1939, the Methodist Church came back and they established a separate jurisdiction for black people. And this was a condition of merger from the Methodist Episcopal Church South. So 1939, the Methodist Church is established with a segregated jurisdiction for the black constituency of the Methodist Church. 1968, we come together. The Evangelical United Brethren Church says, we're not joining y'all until you abolish what was then known as a central jurisdiction. And the Black Methodist for Church Renewal was formed, and the goal was to keep in front of the church the needs of black people in America. So it's been a struggle. 1972, the last conference to become United Methodist or to merge after 1968 was South Carolina. They struggled with the whole concept. They struggled with having black superintendents, and some of them struggled with having black bishops. It was a very difficult time. And let me just say something that's kind of unpopular, but in pushing the conversation, it's necessary to say that the latest reason for splitting is suggested to be around a clause in a discipline that prohibits gay persons from being ordained, and a clause in a discipline of 1972 suggests that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And maybe in the 80s, this movement grew to abolish that language. And as of recently, at least within the past 15 years, past 20 years, that fight has become more and more and more and more aggressive, to the point where there's a split, and there's strong support for that particular movement. And there have been some in the African American church that felt ignored and that felt that they have never acquired such allies in such a way, that they have never had such advocacy in such a way, and this has flattened the spirit and the hope of some black Methodists within the denomination. So I think it's important to have this conversation and to kind of give us a voice to just talk about some things. And I know that there will be other people joining us. There will be some white people joining us, people of color from different places. And of course, we welcome all, and we invite them into the conversation as well. So that's kind of the basis of why this conversation is necessary. It is necessary because in some ways, we have found ourselves right back in 1950s, 1960s as it relates to the relationships between black and white people. There was a senator, the current senator from Louisiana, one of them, Senator Kennedy, who came out and boldly said that there is no racism in America, that the United States is not a racist country and does not have any racism currently. So let's look at what all of these things mean in the next several weeks as we take an attempt to unpack some of that. All right, y'all with me so far? Okay, so let's talk about the concept of black power. Black power. Now, when I was growing up, there was a lot of conversation around black power, and some of it was associated with the Black Panther movement, and some of it was associated with a more aggressive stand on racial injustice and inequality than, let's say, Dr. Martin Luther King, whose stand was, in their mind, too relaxed. It was too cushiony. And Dr. Martin Luther King worked for a beloved community. And his point is that we either learn to live together or we will die as fools. Those were the two options for Dr. King. Dr. King made it clear that we in America, we here to stay, we not going nowhere. So we might as well learn to live as the community that God has called us to. And of course, to be a spirit-led people is to be what? A people of unity. We see that in Acts 2. The apostles went and they were given the ability to speak languages of different people so that they could be united and be brought to the Christian movement and be brought to Christ. So we struggle with some of these terms like black power. And there were many black people, for example, that didn't like the term black power in those days. They thought it bred too much violence, it was too reckless. And not only did they think it, there was absolutely the white community thought it. The white community, and some of whom were sympathizers, some of whom were allies, that thought the Black Power movement is too aggressive. This is not the way you bring about justice. You don't come in so mean-spirited and what they considered in some regards to be hateful. And we're seeing some of this today with the Black Lives Matter movement. There are some churches across the country that refuse, for example, to utilize a Black Lives Matter sign in the wake of all of these police brutality experiences, because they're kind of mixing up the Black Lives Matter organization with the saying, and the two are not the same. So when we speak of Black Lives Matter, we're speaking it in a realm where black lives have not mattered. So they don't mean to say that all lives don't matter. All lives matter for some, except for Black Lives Matter. George Floyd's life didn't matter. Mr. Nichols' life didn't matter in Memphis. Breonna Taylor's life didn't matter. Trayvon Martin's life didn't matter. So we can't really say that all lives matter when it's clear that they do not. And then there was the concept of blue lives matter. So there was this alternative. We're seeing alternative messaging because we're not going to support a Black Lives Matter concept. Because for some, Black Lives Matter means that white lives do not. And they're struggling with that concept. For some, Black Lives Matter means that blue lives are at fault for the criminal problems of black people. So as an alternative to Black Lives Matter, there's been a great deal of support lended to police morale. Thank you, police officers. Thank you to our police. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So we are beginning to see how there is a struggle from the white community to embrace these concepts of Black Lives Matter. They can't say it. They struggle to say it because of the fear that the statement also means that white lives do not matter. And so we're at an impasse there. And black communities and black people hear and see churches that are slow or have not been able to respond to some of the issues in Black America, or they have not been able to support some of the challenges in Black America. Black people see that and they want no part of it. So these are some of the things that contribute to the problem. Black power, what does black power mean? And people who supported black power did not mince words. They were very aggressive with their language. And some of them were angry and fed up and frustrated. So let's take a look at some of this. And what I want to begin is we all have things that we have to learn. And we all need to begin by number one, being honest about it. We just have to be honest about what's happening in the streets. When the church is too scared to address what's happening in the streets, the church is no good. Church has no value. The church becomes an insulated group of people that is antithetical to what Christianity is all about altogether. We have to have the conversations that people are having in airports and on airplanes and in grocery stores, and we're turning our back to some of those issues, but the world is bubbling up with so much hatred, and the church struggles to address these things. So what I'm hoping we can achieve in this time together is some defining. And let's look at some definitions. And Dr. Cohn helps us with some of this, all right? We're living in an era where it's difficult to define anything, like democracy. You ask 6 people across the country what democracy means, you're going to get 6, if not 12 different answers. I don't think we agree on what good is collectively. You would think, for example, that forgiving student loans is a good thing, but no, not for everybody. There's an adamant desire to not forgive student loans from many. Y'all ought to pay your debts, right? We're struggling with what is evil, like gun control. There's some aspects of gun control, for some that's evil, for others it's not evil at all. And we see students vulnerable to being slaughtered in their schools. We see local settings, grocery stores, bus stops, playgrounds, where people are being killed. And there's a slow reaction to do anything about it. These are the days in which we live, so it's hard to define for so many when it's so relative to people: democracy and good and evil, racism, injustice, inequality, all of those things. But let's take a look at Black Power tonight, if you will. All right? Now, Black Power is about Black people. Black Power is about the complete emancipation of Black people from white oppression by whatever means Black people deems necessary. This is what Black Power is. It's the ability to live in our own self-determination. It's Black people's desire to live in the context of their own self-determination. And one of the ways they utilize Black Power is through money, boycotting, marching, demonstrations, some forms of rebellion, and it's not new. Let me assure you that the minute Black people were placed in slavery, that was also the very minute they wanted to try to figure out how to get out of it. So during this time, by the way, in slavery, Black people were taught, honestly, that everything about them was wrong. Black people were taught that everything about them was wrong. Their color, the texture of their hair, their lack of being educated. They were stripped from their villages where they were leaders and decent citizens of worth and integrity. And they were brought and sold and stripped from their families, never to see their children ever again, never to see husbands and wives, mothers and fathers ever again. People who espouse wisdom and leadership in their villages now on auction blocks with chains around ankles and wrists, those who didn't jump over, those who actually made it to the new America in Charleston, South Carolina, and some other slave ports in the South. Basically, friends, they were taught to hate themselves. Now, I want y'all to stick with me here. I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Y'all okay out there? It's kind of weird still, talking and I can't see y'all, but they were taught to hate themselves. Right? They were taught that what they were was wrong and what their white counterparts was right. They were basically taught that everything good is white. Jesus, in their opinion, not their opinion, but they learned that Jesus was white until they read about him, but that's another matter. In many of our churches, black and white, we put up a picture of Jesus who was fresh out of the beauty salon and clearly European, European features, and makeup up with lipstick and everything. And for years, it was taught that Jesus was white. There's a message that was going around by Billy Graham, who reversed that notion. Billy Graham reversed that notion in the 60s and made it clear that Jesus was not white, But when you're getting this beat into your psyche and your system, when you get it beat into your mind and your thinking, then what's the alternative? The alternative is to hate yourself. To hate yourself. To hate things about you. And the alternative is to want to eventually be like white people. You want hair like them. You want eye color like them. You want whatever you think is them, you kind of want to emulate that. And so that was the beginning of the psychological destruction of black people. Even when it came to voting delegations throughout the colonies and in the new formed country, how do we account for the black population? Well, we will consider them 1/3 of a full citizen, 1/3 of a person. All of this bears down on black people. And let me tell you, we are still wrestling with the trauma of those very days. If we don't get nothing else, I want us to get this tonight. We are still struggling with the trauma of slavery, even though we ourselves have never had chains on our ankles and on our wrists, even though we have never been whipped and made to work out in a cotton field for hours at a time. We are the descendants of those who were. And we struggle with that. We still struggle with a country that was slow to give us housing. They didn't want black people moving into certain neighborhoods. There are church deeds. I might as well tell the truth while I'm teaching this class here. There are church deeds that clearly state that their property is to never be sold to anyone of African descent. Because there has always been an extreme hatred of black people in these United States. All right? Sometimes I got to pause because this stuff is even heavy for me to deal with. So therefore, black power is the attempt to reverse these notions, where black people themselves view themselves as people with dignity, integrity, and self-worth. Can you imagine what it's like for a little girl to be stared at and ridiculed when she was marched by U.S. Marshals into her high school? You don't think that has any impact on the psyche of black people? Having a church exploded and killing 4 little girls in Sunday school, you don't think that has any impact on the psyche of black people? Seeing Emmett Till's body in the newspaper, how horrific he was beaten, and to this day, nobody has been arrested around that. And you don't think that has any impact? Seeing people, your friends in the neighborhood, your family, hanging from trees, and you don't think that has any impact on black people? Psychological impact. This is why we have to talk about this. And this is why the historical black church is critical, because somebody has got to be around to tell the story. Somebody has got to be around to remind us, because what we're seeing is an attack on black historical education in school systems. Scared of critical race theory, for example, and critical race theory is not even taught necessarily in those schools. You know what critical race theory is? It's an examination of how the law has been a participating entity in the oppression of black people. Yes, 3/5 compromise. You're absolutely right, Brother Harris. They were 3/5. I said 1/3, 3/5 of a person. But you know, critical race theory is scaring everybody. Scared for what? Why are we scared and horrified? And politicians are currently gaslighting people on critical race theory. And people are running from it like the plague, and they don't even know what it is really. Critical race theory was a conversation that began at one of the leading institutions in the country, Yale University. And in that conversation, it was a review and an analysis of how the law has been utilized to continue oppression and inequality and injustice for African American people. It's a very objective, intellectual study. Nobody's teaching that to anybody in 3rd and 5th grade. But now we're ready to take all of those sections out of the textbook. Take everything about Native Americans out of the textbook. And it's to do what? It's to protect what is seen as a barrage of insults on white America. So I'm not trying to be a preacher of doom. I'm just trying to address this as best I can. These are tough conversations we have to have, and most of them are fueled by misinformation. Most of them are fueled by ignorance. You know, I saw a clip the other day of a gentleman said 9/11 happened because of Barack Obama. He was not in the White House. He was not doing what he was supposed to be doing. He was out golfing, and he was not paying attention. And the interviewer said, "Well, where do you think he was?" "I don't know. We're going to have to get to the bottom of that." I tell you where he was. He was teaching and being an organizer in Chicago. He wasn't in the White House, sir. Misinformation and ignorance. I don't want Obamacare. Absolutely. Well, what about the Affordable Care Act? Yeah, I'll take that. The Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are the same thing. And in my opinion, the last thing Florida and Texas needs to take out from their textbooks is the story of black people. Because some of their citizens are horrifically misguided. So black power is the effort for black people to view themselves as people with dignity, integrity, and self-worth. This is essential to understand because as far as black power is concerned, the other notion of black power is this is not something that can be given to us by the white community per se. So as a result of that, black power is the product of black thought. And we had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X both reinstill pride in our people, and it was necessary to do so because so many of us didn't have it. The poverty was horrific in some places. It was horrible. We have documentation of people living in very severe poverty. And when, guess what happens? When you're trying to make ends meet, you have to put your kids to work now. And when you put your kids to work, guess what happens? They don't get to go to school. And when they don't get to go to school, guess what happens? They can't read. And when they can't read, they're vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And so it meant something when in 1990, that first people in their family was going to college. In 1980, it meant something. So Black Power was the mechanism. Very good question. Oh, and I want y'all to know Jerry Parker Jr. and I went to college together, by the way. We're college boys and we're from the same hometown. And you know, Jay would be one of those that would get us fired up in these great debates. But it's good to see you in here tonight, Jay. So Jay asked, and I'll pause here, Pastor, how do you recommend we as people encourage more Black pride and more Black power? First of all, I think every empowerment is through education. And we have to get back to a place where we are affirming educational principles within ourselves as a community. We have to get back to the case where we're educating our own kids, where we're tutoring them. Some of them are struggling in 3rd and 7th grade. Almost every Black church needs to have a center where people are being helped and educated, reading skills sharpened. Because some of the greatest inventions we have in the world were inventions by Black people. And who are we waiting on to do that? We also have to support our people who are in white settings, people who are in white institutions, people who are working for white corporations. They need a place and a means of support because it's hard. Because in those settings, nobody's teaching them about their history. Nobody's recognizing things and things that are unique to the people of struggle. What is our educational product? And one of the things, Jay, that I think that makes this hard, honestly, I think one of the things we've lost is, we were talking about this in church yesterday, after church, I should say. We've kind of lost a center. Where's the center for Black people now? It used to be the neighborhood, the local businesses, the parents, the schools, and everybody was speaking the same language. They were, when you, and Jay, you know, when we were going to school at Bunker Hill or wherever, the principals, our parents, people in the street we didn't know, we were all getting the same message. Keep your head together, stay in school, you are young, beautiful, and Black. Who's telling our kids that now? Lord have mercy. What a mess. Who's telling our children who they are? Right, you know, you get hip hop is educating our kids, cable is educating our kids. You know, we have human trafficking and gang violence in the street. You know why? Because it's so hard to get into college now. People don't believe in it. People can't afford it. They don't believe that there is anything beyond a life of crime and trafficking. And hip hop is another form of music that's been exploited, arguably by white corporate execs. So what I want to say is, friends, we got to have this conversation without people taking it personally. I have white friends that I deeply care about, and when I have this conversation, I'm not talking about them individually. I am talking about something that's bigger than them. I am talking about a system. I'm talking about an ethos. I am talking about a way of life that has claimed this country. And we even justify it theologically and biblically. Let me move on. Let me move on. Woo, that's a loaded question. How do we get, or why don't more black parents bring their young adults to church? Or church is a foundation for education, or it used to be. That may be why so many feel disconnected. I think one of the challenges of being a historical institution is you have to be open to the evolution of change sociologically, change in art form, change in standards. And what I mean by that is, you see I'm here and, well, I was trying to be kind of Army-like. I'm here in fatigues and a hooded sweatshirt. Nowhere in the world was some of the pastors I knew growing up ever step foot in church like this. Never. My church law professor wore a suit every single day. And if there was a picnic, he was going to, if there was a cookout, he was going to that cookout in a suit. You know, and so cultural norms change. Music sounds change. Art forms change. Dialect change. Sociological themes over the ages change. And where the church struggles, it struggles in its ability to adapt to those changes, and as a result, it loses its relevancy and it loses its credibility to teach anybody anything. So that is one of the challenges we have to kind of wrestle with. You know, for example, when Kirk Franklin came out, so many people, I'm not playing that in my church, but we didn't see it as an opportunity to connect with younger crowds and younger communities. And Paul believed this. Paul said, when I'm in Rome, I do as the Romans so I can win some. And he didn't mean in terms of sin, but I have to have a social connector, a cultural connector with the Roman people so I can talk to them. But you can't talk to people and you don't know their concerns and their struggles and their issues. You're not listening to what they're listening to on television and musically. And as a result, you have become culturally irrelevant and antiquated and obsolete. And as a result, sometimes nobody has use for the church anymore. And sometimes the church is highly protective of those things that they consider to be standards, or they consider to be correct, even if it's not biblically substantiated. And as a result, the church has lost its ability to capture the imagination of a runaway world. So that's just my stab at that. Yes, yeah, we have to figure out how to do that. I'm not saying we need to throw the tradition away, but let me say this, all traditions need to be reviewed and evaluated over time. Let me say it again. Every tradition needs to be reviewed and evaluated over time. Tradition is a practice that's born out of our culture. It's not necessarily biblical. And sometimes we try to connect the two. Now, it is offensive, not so much as it used to be, but there was a day when a man walked in the building, he took his hat off. Now, that's not biblical. For men to take their hats off in a building, that's not biblical. But it was just a standard. It was a cultural sign of respect. There was a day a gentleman outside would tip his hat, open the door. None of those things are biblical. They're just signs of being polite. So all of these things are up for being, reviewed. One of the things we struggle with is gentlemen in our communities aren't pulling up their pants. We're offended by that. They're walking down and their undergarments are very visible to the public. There's a trend right now where kids are going to school in their pajamas, their pajama pants. Now, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know what it's about. I'm certainly not for it. It's not biblical, but it's culturally inappropriate for me. And we have to make sure that we're not so turned off by the things that are culturally inappropriate that we're linking them with biblical stuff. We're linking them with outside of our reach and our beyond. We're making sure that they are worthy of our judgment because a lot of their behavior is culturally inappropriate. And because they're culturally inappropriate, we feel that they are in a bad religious place. And we have to kind of get over some of those things. So that's just me. So let me push through this. It's 7:30. I'm going to pray that you give me at least 5 more minutes so I can wrap some of these things up. Wow, that hour came quickly. So that's what we understand Black power to be. It's an attitude, an inward affirmation of our essential worthiness of being Black. And you heard a lot about it in the 70s. You don't hear much about it now. And there was a quick consultation. Y'all need to pipe all that down. Y'all need to calm that down because you're not helping the cause, you're not helping the movement. So whenever African American people speak up for themselves, it's considered insulting. It's considered that they're too angry, that they're too volatile, and they need to tone that down. But nobody told the Jews to tone down concerns when it came to Germany. It's understandable why Jews would have trauma around Germans, those who came out the Holocaust. That's understandable. Nobody's telling you Ukrainians to pipe down their rhetoric with Russia. Why do Black people always have to behave in a way that makes other people feel comfortable? I know this is hard. I know this is a hard conversation to have. And but we got to have it. And if it's held anywhere, it needs to happen at Hope Church. But we're going to wrap this up. But we have to be okay with our need to voice, and African American need to voice its concern and its trauma, because Black power recognizes that no matter how much conversation is held, for example, with white America, they will never be able to understand the trauma that has been endured by Black people. And as a result of that inability to understand it, they can't fix it. Black people have to fix it. So I'm gonna pause here, and next week we're gonna talk a little bit about can Black people be racist, and what might that mean? And hopefully we'll get into what the gospel of Jesus means and how it impacts and connects to Black people. So remember, Black power is an affirmation of the humanity of Black people in spite of white racism. And integration isn't the problem. My last statement here. Integration isn't the problem. Integration has brought black people into a white system. Integration is not the coming together of two cultures. Integration is almost, we'll let you in, we'll let you participate in the dominant culture. And we want you to adapt the dominant culture, even at the expense of losing your own cultural artifacts, your own cultural significance and practices. Black Power attempts to preserve those things. So it's not as offensive as it may come off. It depends on who you're talking to, I suppose. But we got to struggle through this together. And I thank you for your time tonight. I thank you all for your engagement. I know this is hefty stuff, and I pray I don't need an escort to my car, but it is what it is. And I thank you guys for being in here. Hope to see you next Monday. Let's continue the conversation, and hopefully we may very well be back on Facebook Live, so you'll be able to spread some of that as well. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Thank you, and good night.